Hello, all, and welcome to the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Coolbaugh. Today, I have me a very special guest, Shami Stovall. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
Hello.
anytime. Yeah, I had to think about my own name more than yours. That's like kind of where I'm at today.
Yeah, it happens to the
Last
best
night,
of us.
I tell you, I've been pouring myself out for right mode for this new outline. I've been working on this thing for a while, and it was going to be a graphic novel, and then the pandemic hit, and I feel like it just tapped me out last night. I still have like four chapters, but I mean, it's like almost 10,000 words. I busted it out just within the last couple of days. So I'm just like kind of ready, to get it done and set it aside for a little bit just to kind of recharge there. But I'm so glad that, I found you on Facebook and TikTok, checked out your books, bought a couple. I'm really excited to read them. Like I said, I got like I think 4 or 5 books that I got to review first, but you're doing some things I got to say that I want to do myself. So I was, really impressed, just from an advertising aspect, from both the fantasy and sci-fi aspect. I'm like, here's somebody who's doing exactly what I want to do and how I want to do it. So I was so happy, that I messaged you and, we could get you on today. And get you on sooner rather than later. So I'm like really, really excited to, pick your brain today. So thank you again for coming. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. It's awesome to be here. I'm always happy to randomly roll onto a podcast, cool YouTube channel. That's how I am.
That's fair. That's fair. I don't blame you there. Well, we'll start there with that first question. What has your writing journey been like up until this point?
I guess if we start back from the beginning, way back in the day, I used to be a dungeon master for Dungeons
Oh,
and
cool.
Dragons type of games, and a lot of my friends said that they really liked my games, and um my eventual husband, he wasn't my husband at the time, but my husband, he was like, man, you should be an author, you should write. So I started writing while I was in law school, and
Hmm.
I just showed my books to my friends, but a lot of my friends were like, these are bangers, Shammy, you should definitely get these out here, what are you even doing with your life? And so after I graduated law school, I was supposed to be an attorney. And I did work in like a drug court for a little while. And
Hmm.
technically, I interned in a bunch of family law places and stuff like that. But
Hmm.
being an attorney sucks. Like, it's like the worst thing ever. So I just really hardcore went into authoring. And now that's what I do. Me and my husband own a like a publishing company, and we do a bunch of stuff like that. So um, it was an awkward road here, and I got student loans that I'm paying off for a career that I never actually went into, but it's okay. It's all gravy. It's fine. It's fine. We're fine. Everything's fine here.
I gotta say, as a teacher, I definitely understand that. I was like, had all this money set aside for, editing and Felix and Sean taking, and then lost the AC, lost the furnace, had a baby on the way. So
Yeah.
I definitely understand that. And now I'm like, oh, I kind of wish I had done, what some of my other friends had done, authors that, I know who, in the tech field. I was like, I kind of wish I had done something like that just so I could, one of them was like, oh, it's really redundant. That's why I like to write. And I'm like, I get that. I get that. I'm like, my job is never redundant. I'm like, every day's a new adventure. I never know quite what to expect. But yeah, I definitely get that in terms of career wise. But yeah, for someone's asked me that the other day, like, I think one of my coworkers was taking home, was like, oh, you're just gonna go home and relax, right? I'm like, no, I'm like, I gotta get some writing done. I was like, I don't want to do X, Y, and Z the rest of my life. I was like, even if I just make a little bit to not do summer school anymore, I'm like, I'll be okay just taking summers off with my son, and writing part of the day, reading, taking him, somewhere adventuring, and then just hanging out. One of my friends did that years ago, and now the last 10 years, he's been full-time author, and I'm
Nice.
just so jealous of him, getting to do that with his son and, have that time. And now both of his kids now. So I definitely understand that career wise. So right there with you, my friend, right there with you. Um, so I just want to mention, well, you mentioned, your guys's, company. So can you just elaborate on that just a little bit for us, just so we can get
Well,
a
I
little
mean, I
audience information out there?
sure, yeah, but I went to law school, so I need to use this law degree for something. And what I used it for was setting up an LLC, which is actually quite easy. Anybody can set up an LLC in all seriousness. Although my husband and I will probably be switching it to an S corp. But this is mostly like, how do you fill out that fucking paperwork? How do you set up a company? In the United States, companies are treated like individuals, so they have their own like quote unquote social security number. It's usually called an EIN or a TIN, depending on how you set up your taxes. But having a company allows you to do company things. I know that's going to sound crazy, but you can have company bank accounts, company credit cards. The company assumes the risk. I mean, that's why you have a limited liability company to begin with. If you're sued, technically the company is sued, that kind of thing. Legal, it's more of a legal thing, and it's just nice having it. I mean, I could explain for the entire hour of this interview how to set up an LLC or why it would be important or why somebody should do it, but um, it's not difficult if for whatever reason you want to set one up for yourself, or like you mentioned, you wanted to have like a YouTube channel and start making revenue and stuff like that. You can make a company that can, it gets the revenue for you, and then you pay
Yeah,
yourself
yeah.
from the company, that type of thing.
Well, I just thought it was interesting because on Lindsay Broker's podcast with like Joe Lalo and they had a couple other people on for a while there. And like kind of rotating in other people that were asking people questions, they had some guest spots, things like that. But they're the two that like were really from the start. But it was interesting to me because right at the end for their marketing podcast, once they switched it from like fantasy and sci-fi writing, but they had mentioned, a lot of people went on there and were talking about how they started their own LLC and just different things, their own press or, whatever, just to get their own books out there just for, those different expenses and things like that. And I was just curious because, it's hard to find people that have done that, recently within this field. But to me, it's always interesting because my friends and I have talked about that for quite a while, and it'd be nice to put a couple things down as a business expense, all these definitely expensive things you do, particularly for indie publishing. So I always think it's just an interesting concept. And I think a lot of people now, for some reason, haven't been doing that as far as I know. I don't know a lot of people who have done it in the recent years, but 4 years ago, that was like something that a lot of indie authors I knew, both for fantasy, sci-fi, romance, were doing. So to me, it's always interesting to find somebody else who has had that same idea. So I was just curious. So we'll go right there with that second question. And this is my favorite to ask you in particular. What genre or genres do you currently write in, and why did you pick those?
Well, I write in science fiction and fantasy. If you consider these different genres, YA, fantasy, and lit RPG, like these, but those are usually subcategories of science fiction and fantasy. And I write in these categories obviously because I love them. Most authors that I've spoken to all agree that romance is the way to go if you just want to make money, because the romance genre is so big, all the other genres could fit inside of romance. That's how big romance is. That's how
That's
much
fair.
money goes throughout romance. Oh my God, you could die. You could drown in the romance that's out there. Um, but I don't really read romance. I mean, I've read some romance books. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not even saying it's, like some people are like shame on romance. No, romance is fine. But I grew up loving science fiction and fantasy just to death. And I read and consumed a lot of those books. I think they're really awesome. I'm a big fan of escapist entertainment. I really like thinking about worlds, places, magic, things that are not real. Um, I don't I don't really want to read a book that's like, whoa, isn't it super sad to be poor? And I'm like, dude, that's how I grew up, was poor. I don't need to read a book about somebody else being super poor. What the fuck? Like, sorry, if you don't want me cursing, probably shouldn't
That's
do
fine.
something like that. But I want fantastical stories where heroes are just, and the love is true and the villains are evil. I'm not, maybe all these other people over here wine swirling with all their nuance and all their like, oh, this is so great. I really want a fun, entertaining story. And that's why I write those types of genres. That's why I write the stories I do. I want to be a merchant of happiness and fun. And,
Oh, I like that.
yeah, I don't. I don't make illusions or promises that I'm not going to keep. All my promises are, hey, we're going to have a good time. You know what I'm saying? Like,
I definitely
stuff
agree
like
there. I think I was just talking to my friend. He's like, "What kind of book are you outlining right now?" I was like, "Oh, just something where like if you didn't have a kid, you could probably sit down and read it between tonight, tomorrow, and like whatever Saturday morning. Just again escapism. I work with kids. I've worked with kids the last like 22 years of my life in either the classroom or in athletics, and
mm.
I love kids, but I've seen some crazy stuff. I've had crazy stuff happen to me. I've had crazy stuff happen to my kids. And, my wife, she loves Law and Order SVU. And I'm just like, how can you watch that? Because as an educator, half the time that's our lives. And I'm like, I don't want to be reminded of it when I get home. I want to go home and play with my kid. And then I want to go read for 30 minutes and I want to be on a different world. And they might have similar problems, but there's different ways to handle them or whatever. That's why I always like the martial arts action movies, like there are plenty of times I wish that I could go and knock that guy who just did that thing that was really mean to somebody. I would love to take my foot on this side and put up on that side of his face, like Billy Jack, but I can't. But, in a book, I could totally do that or have characters or, whatever. And in life, I feel like it's hard sometimes to see when the good guys win or, good gals win or whoever. But in my books or in the ones I like to read, I love when that's the outcome, even if they don't all make it or whatever. I like seeing good triumph. So, Forgotten Realms, I love those books. I think that they did such a great job. There was a lot of depth
You
in a
like
lot
the
of them,
Dritz
but
stuff too?
oh, loved it. Yeah, I love when
Yeah,
Dritz wins. Yeah, and even if he's scarred at the end, I love when the good guys win. I'm a Paladin fan. Love Rangers, clerics. I love the good guys. Love the Punisher. Don't get me wrong, but Captain America is my guy.
and the Punisher's good too.
So
Come on now.
yeah. But I'm just not like I enjoy any story. Like, don't get me wrong, if it's a good story. But for my own stuff, like I want to write where the good guys win, and and sometimes the good guys or gals or whatever you want to say moniker. But I like them to maybe be a little bit better than some of us. Just to have that path to follow, so to speak. But I don't. I have my thieves. Don't get me wrong, and they get in trouble all the time and stuff like that. But yeah, I think fantasy is just fantasy. I love sci-fi. I love, and horror is a good one too. But fantasy and sci-fi for me, I consider horror. For me at least, I consider a lot of fantastical elements, or there's sci-fi with the alien or the thing or something like that. So I consider it really fantasy or sci-fi or supernatural in there. But yeah, it's a lot more fun to me than writing fiction. And even if I do some historical fiction stuff, I put in those fantasy elements, and kind of go from there. So I definitely agree with you. It's definitely my jam, and it's a lot more fun. So if
Nice.
nobody agrees, then you're in the wrong podcast because it's the
Right,
Fantasy and
yeah. It's good.
Sci-Fi
It's always
Fanatics
good to find
podcast.
my
But
tribe, huh? So other people
yeah,
up
there you
here being
go.
like, what? And I'm like, yeah, it's a party.
That's fair. But my friend recently is like, "Are you reading lit RPG?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm reading this one called Homebrew. It's great." I'm like, I just happened just to find it randomly and I like the
Nice.
cover and I looked the blurb on. I'm like, yeah, I'm like, it's a new genre for me, but I'm like, it's fancy. So I will definitely read it. So it's a lot more fun that way. So I was trying to, I was trying to put some of your books here, but you have so many cool products. I was kind of wondering if you could kind of run us through your fantasy and then your science fiction series because I couldn't pick one or two to talk about. So I thought maybe we could kind of just talk about them all real
Um,
quick.
sure, yeah. I mean, I think I'm most known for the Frith Chronicles, which are YA fantasy. I always tell people that they're like a mix between Harry Potter and Pokemon because the
It's awesome.
series centers around people who bond with magical creatures to get powers. So, if you bond to a unicorn, you might become immune to poison. But if you bond to a
Mm,
phoenix, you could create fire and heal people, that kind of thing. So the powers are based on the actual creature that you are connected to. And the creatures themselves are, they speak, they're sapient, they can walk around. So when they bond to you, now it's like your best friend forever and you high five and all this other kind of stuff. So the story starts with the main character who wants to bond with Phoenix because the Phoenixes live on his island. Now, I mean, I guess this is a spoiler, but it's like a chapter 2 spoiler. So, but kooky shenanigans in Tail, and he doesn't get to bond with the Phoenix, and he instead bonds with a nightmare, which is like a
mm.
shadow suit of armor, which is why the first book in the series is called Nightmare Arcanist. Everybody who bonds with a creature becomes an arcanist. So that's where that term comes from. Anyway, it's probably my most popular series. It's very, very very adventure, very YA. You know, there's pirates, there's evil magical pirates. In the second book, the villain is the dread pirate Callisto, and he's bonded to a manticore, you know, so he's an
Hmm.
evil, spoopy pirate. Um, it definitely becomes like a whole adventure. It's a completed series through 8 books. But to this day, I still get people being like, "Oh wow, you know, I found you through the Frith Chronicles. Now I read all your stuff because I love those." And I'm like, "Okay, that's great." And yeah, you know, I'm happy. I keep getting things for that series. So recently, I got like posters and pins, and I did a Kickstarter for some special editions of the books, and that went really well. So people really really like. I mean, I really like it, so I'm glad they do. Super fun fantasy adventure, and that entire series is just a whole bunch of stuff I super love, either from Pokemon or Digimon or Monster Rancher or, you know, all these fun fantasy stories that I used to read back in the day, like Dragon Riders of Pern. Like, there's like a
Oh
million
yeah.
things that are like, whoa, and then you bond with the creature, and then you had a fun time, and I'm like, man, I can't wait to write something like that. Um, so that's probably what I'm most known for and my biggest fantasy. But I also have a degree in history, and one of the other fantasy series I wrote
Oh,
was the Ethereal Squadron, which is secret sorcerers in World War One. Um,
that's cool.
you know, I've also written Lit RPG, which was the Nexus games. So one of the other things that I super love, just an unreasonable amount of, is like Warhammer 40K
Oh yeah.
and like death games, Hunger Games type of type of crazy shenanigans. And the Nexus games are just my love of all those things squished together. So it's definitely high fantasy, high tech. So there's like a machine dragon. Main character is on Earth, but gets sucked into fantasy world of the Nexus games, and he has to compete in a bunch of death games with a whole bunch of, you know, magic and weaponry. He is a special forces agent, so he knows a lot of weaponry, so he's okay with fighting in a death game. But then all of the individual games that he has to participate in are based off of video game style things like
Oh,
escort
cool.
quests, collectathons. I don't know if you're a big video game fan, but if you are, you should at least recognize some of those quest style stuff. Um, those are the types of things he has to go through, but they're death games. You know, if he doesn't collect all the things within a certain amount of time, they'll die. If he doesn't escort the person from point A to point B correctly, they die. You know, like that kind of thing. So it's fun. It's kooky. It's definitely more in the fantasy than sci-fi realm. I love it, but
Hmm.
it's a harder sale. You know, normally when I say, "Oh, I wrote the Fifth Chronicles," it's like Pokemon, Harry Potter. People are like, "Oh," and I'm like, "Okay, yeah, there you go." And then when I tell them about the Nexus games, and I'm like, "It's actually one of my like favorite series to write because it's so kooky," and they're like, "That sounds awful. I don't want to read that." And I'm like, "That's not entirely true. I have fans of the Nexus games, but less fans of the Nexus games than something like Fifth Chronicles." And I have had people be like, I don't like video games. I don't like the sound of that." And I'm like, "Oh, okay."
So interesting.
First,
Maybe lost it when they said escort quest.
all right, yeah, no, nobody wants an escort quest. And the sci-fi stuff, the one that I just came out with was the Half-Life Empire, and that's more like a post-apocalyptic, like Fallout style world, um, where we had so aliens come to Earth, have alien tech, you know, space tech type stuff. Humanity gets elevated up. Well, like we have cool things like power armor, spaceships, you know, that kind of stuff. But then we have a nuclear war, which obviously puts us in this post-apocalyptic time frame. And so after a period of like a forever winter type of thing, that's where the story picks up. Main character is living in this wasteland, but the wasteland is actually filled with a bunch of really cool things, again, like power armor and other stuff like that because of the war. And she's looking for an underground bunker so that it has like an underground greenhouse and all these like it's a sanctuary underground that's free from all the fallout and free from raiders and people that are up on the surface. That's what she's searching for. That's the Half-Life Empire. And the last series that sci-fi that I wrote is Starmark. And Starmark is about a criminal living on a space station who gets picked up by basically a mercenary company, like that go around doing police work. and he joins this spaceship because the captain is so cool. And the captain's like, "Hey man, join my crew. We're gonna be really cool together on this cool spaceship." And he turns it around. He becomes a good guy. It's more like a redemption arc because of he's on this spaceship. I can't really say anything else without crazy spoilers. And I guess the fun of Star Mark is the twist. So, and then a twist happens. So, if you thought all that other stuff was fun, then a twist happens, then the story gets real. And I have people who like that series too, but I wrote that a long time ago, and I released the sequel like years after the first one. And in the indie book community, they're like, "That's a no-no because people have forgotten you already." And I'm like, oh, "Okay." Um, but it's my favorite sci-fi series, so I read it real slow. I have one more book to release in it. Super love it. Uh, yeah, I think I've covered most of everything I'm known for. Um, you know, boom.
Drop, mic drop.
Yeah.
Well, I gotta say, I don't know if I've ever had one person say so many words on here that like were keywords where like I could just use it in like a commercial or advertisement. Like,
Well, at a
yeah,
certain point,
that's awesome.
when you gotta market yourself constantly, or people are like, "Give me an elevator pitch," and most of the time, people are like, "What's your book about?" And they just want a singular. They want a singular
Yeah, yeah,
sentence.
yeah,
They want, like a thing that's like, "What is this book?" And I'm like, "It's like this," and then I get out of there,
that's awesome.
like that kind of thing. Not because I don't want to talk about my books, but because my mouth words are not as good as my word words. You know what I'm saying? Like
I
I wrote
definitely
the
get
book
that.
with all the cool words in my head. And then when you're like, "Man, tell me about the book," I'm like, "I don't know, maybe you should read it."
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Summarizing it makes me feel awkward.
Yeah, yeah. It is an
So
interesting thing though, right? To have to like write out something, however many thousands of hundreds, thousands of words, sometimes hundreds of thousands. I had a friend who's like, yeah, 250,000 words. Now I gotta write a blurb. And like whoever who was helping him was like, yeah, three sentences on the back or something for his whatever advertisement on Amazon or whatever. And he was like, I can't do it. It's 250,000 words. And his was like a very unique idea for epic fantasy. So I can definitely understand that. But yeah, but I just think it's gonna be funny when we're like doing a advertisement for the channel. So you'll see yourself a couple times in there where you're like magical pirates, and then you're like Pokemon, everything you're like companions. So you'll see a couple things in there because that is a really good moniker and showing what the channel's about and who's on. So that's awesome. But
perfect.
those all
Glad I
sound
could help
awesome.
out.
I just at any time. Right? I just think I don't know. Your Half-Life Empire to me just sounded so cool. And kind of do it. I don't know if I could say similar, but like I do have power armor and big guys in big suits, kind of Pacific Rim style, but not as big. But just doing different stuff. But I always think it's so cool. I don't know if you've ever seen it was like an old cartoon. It's like EXO, like EXO, where they had like the suits and it was like a cartoon. I don't
Is
know,
it
but
kind
it
of
was
like
so
Gundam?
cool. Kind of, yeah, yeah, yeah. But it was like an American one, and yeah, like wasn't in space, but it was like or anything, but like they didn't go anywhere outside the atmosphere. But it was just so cool. But they had like mech suits for like the military essentially. But it was like set in the future, and it was just really cool. And as a kid, like I loved it. I loved there was like a game, and then like a little handheld one, and then the toys were amazing. And that like always really stuck with me as an adult. Gundam, I was really into for a long time.
Did
Yeah,
you
and
ever
I that
watch
never left.
Escaflowne?
So yep, yep, yep. I don't think I watched that one actually till I met a friend in college who was like, dude, come on over. And that
I really
and
loved
Bleach were like,
Escaflowne. That was a
oh my
fun
God,
mech
that
one.
and Bleach were like his thing. But yeah, it was super cool. But yeah, I did, but those are always things that really stuck with me. So I was like, I got to write something like that at some point. So when I, saw your book and in particular the cover, I was like, this is definitely my thing. So I immediately went to the
Excellent.
blurb and bought it. So I'm really excited to read it and then to have you on again and pick your brain and dissect it. So I always like to talk to authors first, get the sneak peek and then read. I
There you
found
go.
that I know a lot of people do it in reverse, but either way, I buy the book and review it. But for me, it helps so much more as a writer, and I find I enjoy the book more as a reader. So it takes me a little bit longer, but I find it, I personally enjoy it. So if anybody wants to try it that way, feel free to start your own podcast and do it
Right.
the hard way. But yeah, it's super, super cool. But it's just interesting. Like I said, when I saw, I can't remember which of your books I saw first, and then I was like, oh, that's really cool. I was like, oh, that's really cool. And then I think I followed you on TikTok. I go, that's even cooler. So, but it's just interesting to see how, for me, like how you've marketed, your sci-fi and your fantasy. But I still think you have like, to me, you still have a particular style or taste, and for me, I'm like, oh, Nexus games looked really cool. So, there's book one, and, we're talking about like escort class or, anything like that. I'm like, oh, that sounds awesome. So, yeah, but I thought you did a really good job with the blurbs in particular. And then I really, I'm not a big review person. I usually just go to a blurb. And if I like the cover and the blurb and, the person's social medias feel like, I like what they got or how it looks or, the taste or the mood or tone or whatever, then I'll buy the book and then read the book. So, but yeah, I thought that you had some really cool stuff. So, I
Awesome.
was really excited to check out your website and particularly your TikTok. So yeah, really, really cool stuff. So I'm just want to say that to the audience, if you want to see, in my opinion, somebody who's doing it right, here we go. So make sure you're checking out the description and taking a
Whoa.
look at those socials. Yeah, look at that. I did the advertisement thing. I pointed down and I said
Yeah,
it
yeah.
and
Point it somewhere on the screen.
we'll go
Boxes,
up,
clickable
we'll go
links.
down.
Yeah.
My friend was like, we're gonna add some arrows in the future. I was like, that would be really cool.
Oh,
But
snap.
that's awesome. Maybe we'll add one of your people from Half-Life Empire and they'll like shoot or something.
Right,
That'd be
yeah.
really cool.
Full blown animations. You guys are really stepping up
Yeah,
your
yeah, yeah.
game.
Yeah. That's awesome. So this is one that I'm always interested for somebody like yourself, though, who writes, whether or not it's within, lit RPG in terms of fantasy or, going into this part of the sci-fi. But I'm curious, do you find it easy to switch between fantasy and sci-fi, or do you have some challenges in terms of writing in those different genres?
Well, I mean, the different genres have different struggles in them, if that makes any sense. Normally in
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah.
fantasy world, I'm relying a little bit more on my history degree to build nations, borders, things like that. Making up a magical system is also, kind of wholesale or from myths or, in my experience, creature myths and stuff like that. Um, Science fiction typically is based in real world, you know, science, hypotheses, from my experience, if you write those things poorly in science fiction, all of the readers will get upset. I can't in science fiction be like, he can use these epic powers because he's got an extra chromosome. Like maybe that sounds good on paper, but anybody who knows anything about chromosomes is gonna be like, dude, if you've got an extra chromosome, you've got Down syndrome. You don't have fucking telekinesis. What the hell? So then everybody's enraged. You can't just make up stuff like that. Whereas a lot of the time in fantasy, it's not making up, it's just justifying, but usually in a way that you've also created. Like, hey, the human soul creates magic when you're bonded to a creature. Okay, you know what I'm saying? And in
Yeah.
universe, when I say that, it can work in universe because I don't have to back this up with some sort of science. I just have to be consistent. Internal consistency is the struggle for fantasy, whereas external consistency is the struggle for science fiction. You have to be externally consistent with what the actual real world gives you in limitations. And in fantasy, you've got to be consistent within your own world. So switching between writing sci-fi and fantasy is easy so long as I'm not dealing with these consistency issues, quote unquote. If I get to a point in sci-fi where it's like, well, now I have to talk about poisonous gas and how most poisonous gas is odorless and colorless, and you could just be in a room and then just die. So how does the main character get around that? Now I've got to do a whole bunch of research about gas, how they've dealt with that in the past, what exactly goes into making a gas mask, like something like that.
Yeah,
Um, Whereas in fantasy, sometimes I'll be writing and I'll be like, okay, it gets into a room and this guy's got lightning magic. What have I said about lightning magic? Like, what about people who have bonded with this type of dragon? What are their limitations? So now I have to go back. So in sci-fi, I've got to research fucking gas masks and actual gas, and in my fantasy, I have to go back and research my own books and be like, what did I say about this dragon before? So really, the writing process is very similar. It's just slightly different where I'm getting some of my information from. Um, but I tell adventure stories whether or not I'm writing fantasy or science fiction. So a lot of the
Yeah,
times, a lot of the beats are the same. You know,
yeah,
the first act needs to end on a pretty powerful hook. A point of no return. The second act has to have these like mountains and valleys where we're escalating the stakes, and the third act has to have the crescendo. Things like that. So even if I'm writing sci-fi, even if I'm writing fantasy, they have the same skeleton in terms of I really, really like the 3x structure. So a lot of my stories adhere pretty closely to 3x structures type stuff. I really love endings. If the ending isn't bombastic, why are we even here type of thing. So
mm, yeah.
even in my sci-fi, bombastic endings, my fantasy, bombastic endings. You got to remember it. You got to read it, and it's got to end in such a way that's really entertaining. So yeah, that's my answer. Really, is just whether or not you're going to be internally consistent or externally consistent.
That's a good one. I really want to get a t-shirt for you now where you're like, I'm the bomb diggity bombasticist. I don't know what the graphic's gonna be, but it's gonna be
That's
good.
okay. I just call
Um,
myself the queen of hyperbole because
that's
most of the
awesome.
time I'm over here. Yeah, I'm over here saying crazy, crazy things, but I normally have a pretty laid back and chill demeanor. So a lot of people are like, oh, shit, what did you just say? The queen of hyperbole? And I'm like, yeah, word hyperbole, not physical hyperbole. Just
Yeah, yeah. That's funny. We've been talking for a while about going back through and making different t-shirts for different seasons. So at some point we'll have to do something. So
nice.
um I no, but I mean I totally agree with you there. It's funny because my friend he asked me the other day, he asked me this question like 2 weeks ago. Because I don't know, like so him and have read a lot of like all of Kevin Hearn's Iron Druid Chronicles books, and Kevin does a great job explaining how somebody could um do multiple things by having these different headspaces. And he has his druids where they train themselves on one headspace, two, three, and four, so that I can do combat magic, right? So that you can cut me and I bleed, but I can still perform my spell. And he does it to great effect. And my friend's like, he asked me about it one day. He's like, how do you do this? I'm like, you don't know. I'm like, to me, it's like characters are talking to me in different headspaces. So like you're one character from sci-fi, and then he's over here for my fantasy or whatever. And it's like a different person. I'm a teacher, so maybe this is part of my skill, is remembering what people have told me, and then remembering that person's history and things. So for me, it's like I'm talking to different people. But I talked to my friend recently, who's an author, and he said like, he almost has like a different headspace between fantasy and sci-fi. And I find it easier to switch gears because I'm just talking to different people, kind of, and he has a little bit harder time. Like it takes him longer. I could go home tonight, finish up, this fantasy outline, and which is like dark fantasy. I could go over here to my sword and sorcery, and then I by the end of the night could be in, and working on these big bug aliens. Of course, I have to have them, for my Mech Warrior series. So I just always find it interesting when how people do that, because I've been asked that quite a bit recently. I know a lot of people that would like to do multiple genres. I think that's another thing we're told too with indie, right? Like you have to stick to one genre or else. But I feel like, I want to do what you do. I want to just like, I want to write what I want to write and then be like, oh, it's a lit RPG. Oh, it's this or it's that or whatever. Because I think those are the stories that people are going to want to read. And like you said, you're like, oh, I have people for the Nexus games over here. I have people for these over here. Maybe they don't, cross pollinate, but, you got them. So I just think that that's an interesting thing always to point out for the audience as well. Cause I think sometimes they're told a certain thing all the time. And I know people too with indie, community that have done the complete opposite or, done what you've done and, done really well and had a good time doing it. And I just think if you're not having a good time doing it, why do this crazy thing, and spend all this time and energy on it. So,
Right.
but yeah, I just think it's interesting. But well, that was a great answer. I like that one. Um, yeah, I was just curious because, like I said, it's hard to find people that do both, some sort of genre for fantasy and sci-fi. It just seems like more people are sticking to one thing, which is totally fine, but that's not what I do. So I was just definitely curious at what your
Hmm.
experiences were there. But I was curious, just going back, kind of like, kind of going off that answer. Do you take similar or different steps when you world build? So you talked about internal and external, but in terms of thinking about those things once your story gets going and plot, but like, when you're actually building the worlds, I was just curious, is that how you take it then? Like you're thinking of like the magic system as like internal for the fantasy, and then thinking of those external forces for sci-fi. I was just curious at what your differences were in terms of building a fantasy versus a sci-fi world.
Well, in terms of like things for the Half-Life Empire, I just use actual real world Earth. So and that's why I say it's a lot more external as opposed to internal. I just took
Yeah,
Earth, we're on Earth. You know what I'm saying? Like I didn't have to make up
yeah,
Earth.
yeah,
You know, the things I make up in science fiction are extrapolations. Like, what if the United States collapsed due to nuclear winter? You know,
mm,
but I'm still using landmarks. You know, like the Appalachian Mountains or things like that that are real world. I'm just taking them, putting them into my book, using them. Whereas again, in fantasy, I make up those types of things. Now, maybe I base them on real stuff, like, oh, the
yeah,
Mediterranean is a type of sea that has, you know, certain types of currents. It also has the Sirocco winds from the Sahara that rush over it occasionally. You know what I'm saying? So sometimes
yeah,
I might put something like that into a book where I'm like, oh, look, I've got a really large sea and hot winds come rush over because of the desert that's over here. And obviously, I just lifted that from real life. You know what I'm saying? But
mhm.
I get to make it, and as long as I'm internally consistent, who gives a shit? But in science fiction, I have to use the external rules. I can't be like we're on Earth and then be like, but there's only 5 continents. Because people would be like, well, what the fuck happened to the other 2 continents? And I'm like, oh well, the moon exploded. You know, again, when you say stuff like that in science fiction, everybody's like, that you can't. The moon can't explode. Okay, all of Earth would be completely destroyed. Nobody, human beings wouldn't be living here anymore.
Like the
Uh,
popcorn method, right? Like you screw yourself over. My friend said that. He's like, I said this, and then they're like, what about this? He goes, so then I wrote this. He goes, now I just screwed myself over because I just had to keep adding all these external reasons for X, Y, and Z. So
Yeah, so again, science fiction has all this external consistency, and you just have to make sure that you're consistent with real world stuff. Um, and then you're okay, quote unquote. You can continue with your story at that point, and nobody's going to be too upset. But you know, I guess for world building, that's the bigger difference. It's the exact same as I just said before. You just with science fiction, you got a world build where you take stuff from the real world, you know, use it, and in fantasy, you kind of build from the ground up. But a lot of the times, the building blocks are based on things in real life. I mean, I know that some people are like, "I'm gonna do something kooky." You've never seen this before, you know, like that kind of thing. But even then, it's still kind of based on real world phenomenon. But yeah.
interesting. I was just curious, like when you talked about, like the alien tech and different things like that. Like, how did you? I was just curious for the Half-Life Empire, like how you approach the differences, in terms of technology between ourselves and like this. I would assume an advanced civilization. So just kind of curious at like kind of how you added some of those external elements, and I would say some of those fantastical elements to your sci-fi.
I guess this is where it gets a little easier because when you have alien technology, there are some points in the novel where it's like, wow, the aliens, they had this power source, a damn near, you know, infinite power source that does this thing. How does that work? I don't know. It's alien, you know, like that kind of thing
It's fair.
because it's a wasteland. It's a post-apocalyptic wasteland. So there are a few instances of that. Not many because I went out of my way to describe a lot of the batteries as using fission technology. So one of the main things that happens in the book is that she gets a fission battery, and so she needs to protect it. But also, it's a very dangerous item because it's a fucking fission battery, you know, like that kind of thing.
It's fair.
But it creates a lot of power, so people really want it. I use a lot of the like. I made the aliens very alien. They don't have eyeballs, so they don't use a lot of stuff via sight. They have to touch it, so a lot of stuff is very tactile. As long as you are touching it, you can use it, type of thing.
Hmm.
So I do that to give it an alien feel, but otherwise just make advanced things. Like they don't like the alien ships don't have lights or other things like that on a ship. So now
Hmm.
it feels very, very alien because you're like, wow,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
fucking pitch black in here. But the aliens don't need to see, so why would they ever install light bulbs? Like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, but otherwise they have very standard, or what I feel like is very standard science fiction things. They have spaceships. They can travel faster than light, which is the really big problem in science fiction worlds or universes. Like how do we go faster than light? Are we folding space? Are we, is there some sort of warp drive? Is there some sort of wormhole? Does the emperor use psychic powers to let us fly super fast? Like that kind of thing. Um, and so the aliens have that type of tech when they come to Earth. But again, I made it feel alien in some ways. And then later, when we're finding alien artifacts, quote unquote, or like power suits and stuff like that that are meant for aliens, um, I can get away or have like a hand wavium of like the aliens were really advanced, so the suit is still powered 20 years later, even though human technology and most power, batteries are not going to last 20 years and still be totally active for a fucking power suit. But this is different because it's alien tech, pew 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 pew, like that kind of thing.
Makes total sense.
Yeah, so uh, really, it's just a combination of combining sci-fi elements with what I feel like are story elements and giving the aliens a very alien feel. Hopefully, I answered that in a non-rambly way.
Yeah, no, no, no. There was some great stuff there. I always take these later on, and I just find it interesting. I always say to people, like, I just was saying this at my job. I was like, the best things I do are like kiss, like keep it simple, stupid. And it's funny because I always find the best ideas, which to me, your aliens would feel very alien not using sight because we use our sight so much. And I would say more than, maybe we need to sometimes, and we rely on it a lot, right? So to me, like I don't know, that's like such a simple idea, but used in the way that you used it, it's so cool and unique. And I think a lot of people now use like the predatory alien more, if that makes sense in a lot of things.
Oh,
Where
okay, yeah.
sight is a really big deal, or a smell, you know what I mean? Like those are the two senses I think that, people tend to use more, but still I would say sight's the number one, that they use. So for you to take that away, like that's really cool. And I feel like that would feel very alien, being in their technology and not having lights, because that's like one of those psychological things for us, right? Is having the light, and that
Hmm.
helps us with so many things. So I think that's the easiest way to make it feel alien, I think, is to take away the lights and the need for them. So that's like super, super cool. So I'm always thinking about that for my own writing, like what's something I can do that's, just cool, not even unique, because so many things have been done, but like what's just cool or interesting in my world, I don't want to have to build 100,000 things. Well, it's just something that I can change one minor thing to give that type of feel that you're talking about, to make it feel alien, or to, put these people in this place and to do this thing. So I think that's super cool. But yeah, that's a great answer. So I was curious in terms of like just in terms of like writing strategies and tools. Do you pretty much just use the same like writing tools, or strategies for writing both fantasy and sci-fi, or do you mix it up a little bit? You talked quite a bit about internal and external differences, but I'm just curious if there's anything that you do in particular that's different. Like do you use one particular, like I use a fantasy name generator for both fantasy and sci-fi stuff, or real world stuff. I love that website. I love that it's free. If they ever make me pay for it, I will pay for it. But I was just curious if you ever used any different tools or strategies based off of the genre that you're currently writing.
I guess if you're looking for like the names of tools like fantasy name generator or something like that, what do I use on the daily? The only thing that I constantly recommend to people is naturalreaders.com.
Okay.
It's a website that you put in the stuff that has been written and it just reads it back to you. I mean, there's
Oh,
probably a
that's
lot of other
cool.
programs that do that for you as well. This one just makes it really easy because it highlights the words as it goes, type of thing.
Yeah.
I think most word processing or Microsoft Word programs now have like a it'll read it for you type of feature, but I use that program all the time. It's mostly just because when it reads it back to me, I can catch really bizarre writing problems. Like, you know, they walked into a huge room where there was a huge pillar and a huge ceiling, and everything was so huge that it totally blew his mind. And I'm like, how did he use fucking huge 4 times in one sentence? You know what I'm saying? Like, what's wrong with you? And when it's read back to me, it's very easy to catch, whereas it's not as easy to catch when I'm reading it.
Yeah, yeah.
Additionally, when it's read back to me, I can catch some of my really awkward writing, where I wrote a sentence, but it was half a sentence at best. It was more like a dead sentence where it's like, what happened here? A homicide. That I mean, that's the only tool I guess I could articulate and give you a name and be like, this is the one I use. Otherwise, I just use Microsoft Word. I already told you I was a really big fan of the 3x structure, and I use it for every story, whether it's fantasy or sci-fi.
Yeah.
That's not like a program I use for that. I just read a bunch of stuff about 3x structures. I used to teach a few classes about how to outline in 3x structures. I did that for a
Okay.
while. People found that really helpful, but that's just the thing now I've internalized. Like
Yeah.
how English, and you don't need to be studying English or you don't have an English dictionary on the on your fucking
Yeah. Yeah.
counter. That's how I feel about the 3x structure. It's like, yeah, I know English and I know the 3x structure. It's my other language.
Yeah.
Um, so that's it. I feel like I'm not very fancy. I'm not one of the
Yeah,
cool kids.
I think it's helpful though. Like, and I don't know why I never thought about this. But I don't know why I never thought about it, but now you just made me think about it, like cultural diffusion, right? Where maybe if I had a different story or different names or things, like just hearing those, pronounced out loud, even if it's just with AI or, one of these softwares or apps, just maybe just hearing it might make me think differently about it, right? And I know that I tend to pick names differently for fantasy and sci-fi, whether it's people or places or worlds or or whatever. So I don't know. I'm kind of curious now. Now you have me worried. I feel like I need to hear them out loud for something else or somebody else to see if it even remotely makes phonetic sense. But I think that's one I always forget about is the audio. Like I'm always doing, so many other things or having somebody else read. But yeah, I haven't really considered the audio in a while. So I need to kind of go back and do that. So I think that's a really good one there. That's awesome. And I think a lot of people in the audience would actually really find that helpful too, who have not done that before. So
All
I know
right,
a
yeah,
lot of
it's
people
just
don't
called
like to read themselves.
naturalreader.com. So it's not anything crazy.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not like a
It's a good idea though.
it's not like a hidden secret. It's just a normal ass free
But there
application
was
online.
almost like there's almost like too much online, like I've looked up that stuff before and that never popped up for me, so maybe some people like that, how it does it, or says it or whatever, I don't know, more than Microsoft Word or something like that. Microsoft Word with the audio, it drives me nuts. I don't think that
Oh, okay,
reader
yeah.
could read. I don't think that reader can read real good. So it kind of drives me nuts.
He's trying his
But
hardest, or it's
he
trying
really
its
is.
hardest. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They're doing the best, but yeah. So and then sometimes people, if you're reading a long book, I had a friend who they actually picked a couple different readers, and they had one where I think they paid, where you could get a different voice reading, and that helped them out a lot too.
Hmm.
Particularly, when they had like two products, or two books back to back that were like two epic fantasies or something near that, or military sci-fi and epic fantasy. He's like, I can't listen to the same program anymore. So he found one that you're able to switch it. So, which I'm like, I don't blame you because that's like almost, I think he had almost 3,000 words. So I'm like, that's a lot to hear the person be like, the planet was, and just kind of go from there. But if you had to pick one of your characters to fight from your fantasy novels or one from your sci-fi ones, which two would it be and why?
You mean to
Like if
fight
you had to
each
pick one
other?
from each. Yeah, like if you had to pick one from fantasy and one from sci-fi and then fight each other, like what would be the best fight you could imagine, basically?
Um, and it
Or the
has to
most
be one
interesting.
from fantasy and one from sci-fi.
I don't care. Just pick two characters. That's fine.
Okay.
I didn't think of that. That's much better.
Well,
Like what
yeah,
two
because
characters do you want to see fight? Fight, fight, fight.
um, the main character for my Frith Chronicles and the main character for my Astro Academy at least are in
Ooh.
the same fantasy world where they have the same style of fantasy powers. And I would like to see Volk and Gray who are the names of those two main characters, fight each other. That would be fun and entertaining. The problem with the sci-fi guys is that, when compared to fantasy world where fantasy people have like an instant death touch or something like that,
Yeah,
and it
yeah,
was what's the sci-fi? What is he gonna do? Yeah, I'm saying, like, he automatically loses. Or in the sense of the Half-Life Empire, even if you are in power armor or something. I mean, maybe power armor, not really though, because I mean, there's a creature in my First Chronicles that has like teleportation.
oh,
What are
that's
you
cool.
supposed to do about that? You know what I'm saying? Or can
Yeah,
manipulate gravity. So I guess you're fucked now because you're trapped in
yeah.
power armor. You know what I'm saying? And I'm like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
but yeah,
interesting.
I
I had a
guess I guess the
guy.
answer is Volk versus Gray because that would be the most interesting fight.
Oh, that's
Everything
cool.
else would be like a one-sided fist fight, like punching a baby in a stroller. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah. I do that all the time, so I totally get that. So
Punching
yeah,
babies
Well,
in strollers.
yeah. It's only in strollers though. Only in
Yeah.
strollers though. But it's just interesting. I had a friend ask that a while back on a podcast, and then the author that answered it, she was like, "Oh, I have this like." She picked like a sci-fi like person, and it was like this alien with like oh, like what's his name from the guy with like four arms from Mortal Kombat, and he's like one of those aliens, but like their bones are really dense, kind of like the Forklift Sail from like Nails and Book of the Fallen. And she's like a monk essentially, like, and it was just so cool like how she had written like those aliens in that particular character. And I was like, yeah, I can't really see anybody from her fantasy, like at least her fantasy beating him. So it's just like really cool. So I don't know, I was curious. Maybe at some point we'll do character beat downs or something on the
There you
channel,
go.
like
Yeah.
superhero
Character versus
the
character. That's
superhero ones.
always fun.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it'd be cool. I just want to get somebody to animate some of that stuff. I think it'd be awesome. But all right, so we're going to that last question there. Do you have any news, updates, or current projects that you can share with us at all?
Yeah, I just had two books release, the Half-Life Empire and the Crown Tournament. The Half-Life Empire is obviously that post-apocalyptic. The Crown Tournament is like a gigantic fantasy battle arena tournament. It's just the tournament arc made into an entire book, um, which is a lot of fun. Like I love that kind of stuff. I love tournament arcs, competitions in general. I'm clapping hard for.
Yeah.
I'm currently doing my Astra Academy series, which is more in this arcanist world. So it's Harry Potter mixed with some Pokemon. If anybody is interested in that kind of stuff, I'm currently in the midst of writing it. But there's 3 books deep, so it's, almost fourth book. Whoa. Um, I constantly do writing. In all seriousness, if you want any sort of books or news or stuff like that on all my social media, which I try to be on every social media. I'm on TikTok, I'm on Facebook, I'm on the Reddits, the Twitters or X or whatever the hell they call it these days,
I'm sure
whatever
I'll
the
change it
kids are
tomorrow.
doing. Yeah. Um, so I try to be on all those. I try to update everybody as much as possible. I have a newsletter. I write. That's all I do is for my job, and I write all the time. And I super love telling stories. I can't wait to get. I have a million stories trapped in my head, and it's slow going getting them not trapped in my head. So,
Fair.
but I'm doing it as fast as I can. The final Nexus games should be coming out soon, and starting next year, I think I might even have an urban fantasy series. So
Oh, that's cool.
just just kill me now. I can't possibly keep up with all the writing, but I'm gonna try really hard because I really love writing. So
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. That's a lot of really cool stuff. For our audience, just make sure you are checking out the description. You can find all the social links, book links, all that fun stuff. If you're new, if you have been around the podcast for a while, you know exactly what to do and where to go. We also put our Facebook podcast group in there as well in case anybody wants to join. We'll be doing some giveaways and things like that in the group, and we'll be doing that for the channel really soon as well. But we're doing those currently for the Facebook group. But thank you again for coming on. I love looking at your covers. I love your blurbs. I can't wait to read your books. I probably spent way too much day one on them, but there's a few that I didn't grab, and I had a friend just give me a gift card recently, so I'm like so excited to go through my
well,
cart.
you're way too good to me.
And
Thank you.
sit in. I just really like, just like your overall aesthetic for everything. And when we tell people to brand themselves on here, I like how you branded yourself and your different series. Especially, your newest one. That was just such a cool cover and like concept, and even just the
Nice.
color scheme. I really like. They pop. I see them on Kindle. Because I'm not seeing them in paperbacks. I'm seeing you online, and I just think that it's grabbed my attention. And I've
Hmm.
seen your book shared quite a few times. Recently. So it's really nice to see. But we always talk on here about self-advertising. And I think you're doing a great job self-advertising just with the covers and blurbs and things. So
That's
love your
good.
TikToks and social media. So yeah, so if anybody wants to check out somebody that's doing it right, all right, here you go. Again, click on the description. I'll add the Mech Warrior people, or
Nice.
some cool side effects later, and it'll be really neat. But thank you so much again for coming. I look
Thank you for
forward
having
to
me.
seeing what you have. Yeah, anytime you want to come and talk about cool things, let me know, and we'll get you back on. So, but I hope you
Excellent.
have a good rest of the day, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Have fun.
See you later.